The Guardian, Book 1 of the Gods and Kings Chronicles, by Lee H. Haywood. Available now in both print and ebook formats. Visit leehhaywood.com for more details.
Chapter 4. Thatcher. A low chatter signaled his quarry's approach. Careful to not make a sound, Thatcher set an arrow to his bow and slowly drew the line taut. He sighted a hollow between two slabs of rock. Although the hole was little more than a shadow in the pre-dawn gloom, he knew exactly what was there. It was an entrance to a subterranean lair that coursed through the earth like a maze. He drew the feather fletching flush with his cheek. His face twisted in a grimace as he focused upon the bleak task. He struggled to soothe his quickening breath. Perspiration settled upon his brow, despite the unnerving chill that engulfed him. He exhaled slowly, finding the calm and certain point in the back of his mind, the place where the hunter lie in wait, the place where death was just a part of life. His pupils flared, granting shape and form to the shadow in the hollow. "I see you," he mouthed silently. The Ravager edged its body to the brink of the black chasm, urged on by its undying hunger. There it paused, its clawed toes nervously pawing at the soil, its lengthy ears twitched spastically, listening for any sign of danger. Its long hind legs coiled, posed to leap at the first sign of danger. Beady eyes scoured the land as the creature cautiously turned its head. The twin black orbs settled upon Thatcher's still form, then moved on. The hunter went unseen. The beast leapt from the security of its lair with an uneasy hop, and once again cycled through all of its hesitant motions. Step, pause, survey, step. Thatcher pushed the last measure of guilt from his mind. It would be quick and painless, bringing an end to the rampage that had lasted far too long. "What are you doing there, mate?" bellowed a voice from somewhere high above in the sky. Thatcher cursed under his breath. He had no time to wait. The beast was frozen stiff, hind legs torqued, black eyes flared wide. Thatcher let the arrow fly. The knock of the arrow pulled through his fingers like sandpaper. The feather brushed against the skin of his cheek. The arrow traveled the distance in the blink of an eye, but its steel head bounced harmlessly off the rocks. His quarry had bounded back within the confines of its lair in one deft leap. "I said, what are you doing?" yelled Marshall, his voice rolling like thunder from the mountaintop. He crashed down on the top of the rock slab. The crimson coils of his tail pulsated to and fro. His gaping maw was set with a toothy grin. "I'm trying to end a plague around here," hissed Thatcher. He hurled an arrow at Marshall in frustration. Unfazed, the dragon collected the arrow mid-flight. He smiled wryly and began to use the arrow to pick at his teeth. "Hunting for breakfast, I see?" Thatcher ignored his friend's mocking gesture and hopped down the scree-strewn slope towards the small hut he called home. The frost-covered surface and shifting rocks made for a harrowing descent, and he found his Cretan feet oddly clumsy this morning. The sun finally crested the eastern teeth of the mountain. Its beams sent curling tendrils of steam rising off of Thatcher's shaved head and rust-colored cloak. He imagined the vapors matched the burning ire in his stomach. He had waited all night to catch sight of his prey, and in an instant it was ruined. Still, he couldn't find the heart to be mad at Marshall. The grinning dragon cleared the entire distance of the slope in one spry leap. Thatcher could only cringe and watch as Marshall crashed to the earth mere inches from his home. The carefully stacked slate walls of his house recoiled from the resulting earthquake. Thatcher thanked the gods it didn't topple over. Marshall seemed to hardly take note. The elders never did have much regard for property. Thatcher's father would always chide him for trying to live like a Cretan. He would not apologize for residing in a proper house instead of a dank cave like his ancestors were wont to do. Marshall began to prance around Thatcher like an eager dog. "What is this plague you speak of?" "Plague, beast, ravagers of my dream, whatever you want to call it." "You mean that mountain hare?" asked Marshall, gesturing to the narrow plateau they had just descended from. "That's not what I would call the little terror," said Thatcher. He jutted his hands into his pockets and produced several green fragments. "Look what it did." "Left you a present?" "It ate all my radishes." "Those don't look like radishes." Thatcher glared at his friend, his lip twisted tightly in a scowl. Well, how's this to cheer you up? Continued Marshall. What if I said you had the chance to be in the audience of King Johann? I? What if you told me such a thing? Don't be smart, said Marshall, jabbing a clawed finger into Thatcher's chest to prove the point. Something's going on in the borderland. Carrions, they say. I received a message this very morn, and you wouldn't guess who signed it. He held out a crumpled parchment in his massive hand. Thatcher gave the paper a critical eye. My mother wrote this? She and Daihoron wrote their parts. Marshall gestured to a point where the script changed. Thatcher considered the implications for a moment. His parents seldom involved themselves in Cretan affairs unless something was terribly amiss. In his heart, he doubted the carrions existed. This wouldn't be the first time someone raised an alarm over something that wasn't there. Last year it was goblins, and the year before that the fabled call were sighted south of the wall. But the rumor of undead in the borderlands could not be ignored. He imagined every sentinel east of Burrowing Hall had been roused to investigate, and if the elders were taking action, he was obliged to follow suit. Thatcher looked back to his garden plot atop the plateau. He could spy the points of 2 ears bobbing amongst the furrowed rows of cabbage sprouts. If I do this, you have to blast that hole with fire, said Thatcher, pointing towards the den of the mountain hare. Marshall smirked. There's no sport in that. With a swoosh and a pop, his wings caught the air, and he was gone, falling away from the ledge at a terrible speed. With practiced wing strokes, Marshall quickly slipped into the distance. Rabbits and carrions. This was not how he intended to spend his day. In the blink of an eye, he transformed to his true form and took flight. Circling on the updraft, Thatcher rose hundreds of feet above his eyrie. His keen dragon eye spotted the hare happily munching away on a fresh sprout of cabbage. Thatcher shook his fist at the creature. He would get his revenge upon the long-legged beast. Today was simply not that day. Thatcher turned his body west. League after league he chased after Marshall, tearing past powder-encrusted ridges and peaks of cold stone. He bent lithely over the last great ridge of the Ing Mountains and plummeted towards the Sokoto Plains below. He raced onward, finally catching up with Marshall above an endless sea of auburn grass. The morning sun turned the field the color of shimmering flame. The old bull was moving forward with no great urgency, lazily flapping his wings with only enough effort to keep afloat. The Nexus awaits, said the dragon, sweeping his hand out across the expanse. There and amongst the waving stalks stood a ring of stone studded by a pinnacle of white marble. Bathed in the radiance of the morning sun, the citadel glowed with fervent light. Thatcher found himself shielding his eyes from the spectacle. A great wall of stone, its face polished to a porcelain sheen, ran the perimeter of the city. The seamless rampart reached skyward with divine purpose, guarding the holiest places in Laveria. The former home of the gods, the citadel of light. Grand halls dotted the landscape, surrounded by elegant apartments and tower complexes. Gilded domes glistened as they did the day they were erected. Time and wear held no sway on the city. It was perfect beyond the mold of mortal hand. Rarely did Thatcher draw close to the city. Dragons were as welcome to the seat of Caper as a leper was to a dinner table. Before the Guardians gave them civilization, this was where the elders would have come for food. He eyed Marshall's mammoth frame. Thatcher was certain the dragon had feasted upon Cretan flesh more times than he could count. Stone towers still dotted the cityscape, relics of a harsher time. Each was armed with a battery of ballistas. Some lessons are not easily forgotten, thought Thatcher. Men did not take kindly to dropping down a rung on the food chain. At the center of the city stood a white tower that dwarfed all others. As far as Thatcher knew, nothing in the world neared the grandeur of Yazmir. The tower was built atop a freestanding rock monolith, and its pinnacle rose to such a dizzying height it seemed as if its builders were vying to reach the heavens. The tower walls were inlaid with silver, set in the fashion of archaic script. The inlay caught the rays of the sun, casting mirrored light across the city. The rooftops were bathed in the words of forgotten prayer. With a wide grin, Thatcher raced towards the tower, drawn to the shimmering beauty like a moth to a flame. As he entered the airspace over the Nexus, some base instinct turned on in Thatcher's head. Although he had never tasted Cretan flesh, he had the uncontrollable sensation that he was on the hunt. His eyes darted this way and that as he swooped low over the rooftop patios, his pupils honing in on any scurrying shape. He imagined the streets would be packed to the brim with traders during the early morning hours, and in his mind's eye he could see them screaming in panic at the sudden appearance of a dragon. Instead he saw hardly a soul. He scanned the barren city with worry. "Where is everyone?" yelled Thatcher over the rushing wind. Marshall made no effort to respond to the question. His attention was firmly planted upon the Tower of Yazmir. "Look to the tower," said Marshall in a voice that would be considered a whisper to the dragon. "Do you see what I see?" Thatcher's eyes narrowed as he focused in on the monument. "Can't be." He tasted the first twinges of fire simmering in his chest. "But it is," murmured Marshall. "Dragons." Roosted upon the Tower of Yazmir were dozens of black serpentine figures. Their scaly tails coiled around the ledges and their clawed limbs grasped at the white stones. Tattered wings encapsulated the tower's face, hugging the building with vestigial claws. "What is this?" finally managed Thatcher. "Why are there dragons?" His words were interrupted by a piercing whistle. The sound ripped through his ears, causing him to wince in discomfort. The frequency was far too high for a human to hear. It couldn't be a signal to the people. His stomach dropped as he watched two of the dark forms slowly unwrap their bodies from the tower. They warily lunged into the air, and with a few strong strokes made straight for Marshall and Thatcher. "I don't think we're welcome here," said Marshall, his eyes glued on the rapidly advancing dragons. "We're going, now," snapped Marshall. The tinge of terror in his voice was unmistakable. Already he was speeding off as quickly as his wings could take him. Thatcher dared one more glance at the dragons. He could vaguely make out the familiar streaks of gray in their scales. They had the bearings of the Avafu clan, yet their flesh appeared diseased and grotesque. Thatcher didn't have the slightest clue what was going on. No dragon served the throne of Caper. But Marshall was right. They needed to flee. Thatcher wheeled about, churning his wings as fast as they could go. A burning sensation rippled through the muscles of his back and chest as he exerted all of his strength to escape the city. Flaming saliva frothed in his throat, dripping uselessly from his jaw. He felt betrayed by his youth. If only he could use the strength of his birthright, then the pursuers would be the ones to turn in terror. Instead it was he who ran, and as the two dragons came on apace, his mind frantically searched for an escape route. The barren city streets seemed like a good alternative to the sky. He could transform into the guise of a man and hide somewhere. However, he feared he would find no more welcome on the ground. Copernican guards would have doubtlessly taken notice by now, and if the dragons did find him, he might not have the strength to resist them in his Cretan guise. One of the pursuers suddenly latched onto Thatcher's hindquarters. Thatcher flailed his tail like a whip, feeling it rake against serrated teeth. A hand clasped about his thigh, another about the base of his left wing. Thatcher contorted his body and kicked his leg spastically in a frantic effort to throw off his attacker. His left wing involuntarily collapsed to his side, and he was sent careening into a rooftop. The impact was bone-rattling. He heard a crack, and the earth opened up to swallow him. His world spun dizzyingly. A crushing pain galloped down the length of his spine. He came to a rest in a hail of pulverized stone and plaster. He laid still for a moment, in genuine shock that he was alive. He tried to fill his lungs with air, but the draught was polluted with dust. His vision blurred. He blinked several times, but saw nothing. Had he gone blind? Slowly his vision cleared, and what was revealed were thick stone walls, and above that, the remains of a domed roof. Thatcher had fallen from the sky and landed squarely upon one of the city's temples. It was probably the only reason he was alive. The structure had broken his fall, as much as a brick wall could. He eyed the gap in the ceiling where he had punctured through. The sun beamed through the shattered oculus in rays, filtered by the billowing dust. It was the only source of light within the otherwise pitch-black temple. Thatcher gingerly lifted himself upright, realizing he was lying atop a number of shattered pews. He checked the dome again. Were the two dragons still in pursuit? Had they continued after Marshall? The hole in the ceiling was still vacant. He paced around the debris-strewn floor, trying to locate the street entrance to the temple. Glancing into an alcove, he leapt back in fright as the silhouette of a monstrous, gaping maw lunged after him. Jumping to the far side of the hall, he looked back. The enemy was not pursuing him. Instead, it remained within the alcove, mouth still agape. Thatcher issued a sigh of relief that sounded hollow in the vast space. It was nothing more than a guardian statue. After all, this was a temple dedicated to their reign. The ruby eyes of the idol stared back unblinking. Thatcher snorted with contempt at the false god. A noise to his left caught Thatcher's attention. He peered through the dark, eyeing a niche with care. Something was hiding within the shadows. Making a quick leap across the interior of the structure, he sniffed the air. There are humans about. Suddenly a man materialized from the darkness. Standing to his rear was a woman and child. The man looked neither afraid nor happy to see the dragon. "Is there a back way out of here, or a vault beneath the temple?" asked Thatcher, in the lowest voice he could manage. The man shook his head. "My family is hidden here," said the man in a somber tone. "Are they attempting to retake the city?" Thatcher was nonplussed. "Retake the city? What do you mean? Retake the city from whom?" "The carrions," whispered the man. The words chilled Thatcher's soul. "The dead? What of King Johann? Out with it, quickly!" The man didn't respond. He pointed over Thatcher's shoulder and ushered his wife and child back within the confines of the shadows. There was a sharp clack as crumbling plaster showered against the marble floor. Thatcher jerked his head around and cursed under his breath. Perched uneasily upon the edge of the dome was one of the black dragons. The beast snaked its thin head within the building and issued a guttural challenge. It clawed at the faltering stone structure, causing a portion to collapse in a hail of dust and debris. Thatcher was at an extreme disadvantage. The dragon was stronger than him, faster than him, and it controlled his means of escape. The dragon lunged forward like a coiled spring. Thatcher girded himself to receive the attack, but the momentum of the attacking dragon suddenly reversed. And while still in midair, the dragon was yanked out of the temple by some unseen force. It emitted a startled screech and was gone. Thatcher listened intently, not understanding what could have caused the dragon's body to defy physics. The foundation suddenly shook from Marshall's unmistakable roar. A smile parted his lips. Marshall had come to his rescue. Thatcher scrambled forward, desperate to climb out of the building and come to his comrade's aid. An object shot by overhead. It was the other dark dragon. It crashed into the fray like a bolt of lightning. More roars and shrill cries pierced the air. Thatcher pulled his frame free from the confines of the temple, but it was too late. The din of battle was replaced by a deathly silence. Thatcher froze atop the temple's shattered dome, allowing his ears to hone in on the noise beyond. Something heavy was scraping across the ground just out of view. Vision of Marshall's dead body haunted his mind. Surely the old bull had the strength to defeat one of the dragons, but two? Conjuring up his courage, Thatcher leapt into the courtyard prepared to fight. To his utter relief, Marshall was perched over one of the fallen beasts. The other dragon lay broken over a stone wall, his back inverted like the cover of a closed book. "Blessed be all your days, Marshall," Thatcher spoke in a whisper, but his voice seemed to echo through the empty city. "You managed both of them single-handedly." Marshall didn't respond, and continued on with his task, jerking back and forth rhythmically as his mouth worked on something. The sound of slicing flesh caused Thatcher to guess what he was doing. Leaping in front of his friend, Thatcher eyed Marshall with worry. Marshall's jaws were set firmly around the neck of the black dragon. He yanked a few more times, and with a sickening crunch, the head tore free of the body. Marshall immediately gagged, spitting out chunks of putrid flesh and congealed blood. Gripping the head firmly with his claws, Marshall motioned skyward. "Let's get out of here before more of these abominations show up." Only after they put half a dozen leagues between themselves and the desolate city did Thatcher ask the obvious question. "Why in the name of everything holy did you take the dragon's head?" "As evidence," Marshall hurled the blackened head over Thatcher. Thatcher rolled it over inquisitively. He suddenly felt ill. Within the writhen visage, he saw something familiar. The slender eyes, the blunted beak. There was no mistaking the dragon's race. "Look inside the mouth," instructed Marshall. Inexplicably, rigor mortis had already set in. Thatcher had to use all of his strength to pry the teeth apart. Near the rear molars, set on either side of the throat, were two black indentations. Incendiary glands. These creatures were kin of the Avofu clan. "I don't understand," said Thatcher finally. "Neither do I," said Marshall, collecting the mortified Avofu head from Thatcher. "We need to go to Burrowing Hall. The clan must know what has transpired." Burrowing Hall was carved in a pinnacle of stone in the southern reaches of the Ing Mountains. Black cavities pockmarked the rocky pillar. These were the catacomb vaults of the Avofu dead. At the base of the rock spire was the meeting hall, its grand entrance built upon a jutting ledge. The exposed facade of the A-frame temple was painted a myriad of colors: green for the forest, yellow for the sun, blue for the fathomless sea. Before its door hung a dozen flags that beat stiffly in the wind, one for each of the 12 lordly broods. Thatcher and Marshall were not the only ones with news to spread. The courtyard was crawling with dozens of dragons. Thatcher quickly surmised why they had gathered. The eastern face of the mountain had collapsed, leaving a gaping hole where scores of Avofu had once been entombed. He came to a sickening realization about the dragons they had encountered at the Nexus. With a growing sense of urgency rising up his spine, Thatcher perched upon the outer rim of the flagstone ledge. As he landed, Marshall tossed the putrid head to the ground with disgust. The wet smack of rotting flesh striking the cold ground caused everyone's head to turn. The dragons swarmed in around them. "It's her son," murmured one. "The poor little whelp," whispered another. A few bowed their heads and rustled their wings in respect of Thatcher's lineage. "What's happening here?" demanded Thatcher, taking on the stern tone that he hoped would hide his growing fear. Not a soul answered. All simply stared with the same sunken eyes. A sturdy figure in Cretan guise pushed his way through the crowd. "You've brought us the head of an Avofu," said the man. He took the form of an elder, respecting the true age of his soul. "We have, Dai Ferivo," said Marshall with a nod. "We were attacked at the Nexus by the abomination." "Then we are too late," stated Ferivo, his face suddenly stricken with grief. A murmur rose up from the crowd. "Please, tell us what is going on," said Thatcher. "Much, my young broodling," said Ferivo. "Fly with me now. I will take you to Dame Kamara. I'll leave it to her to explain what has happened."